Today we're looking at Module 3, Lessons 5 and 6. 5 and 6 are actually very different from each other, but we'll still be able to cover both lessons. So today we're going to look at the opposite of a number's opposite. Okay? So if I said that I was not tall, that means I am short. So if I'm not tall, what's another word for not tall? Short. So instead of saying not tall, I could say short if that helps me. So what's not short? Tall. So I ended up right back where I started from. Because I said I'm tall, I took the opposite of tall, which was short. Tall. The opposite is short. The opposite of short is tall. I ended up right back where I started from. So that's what we're going to look at today, the opposite of an opposite. And I really wish I was getting paid today by the word. Every time I said opposite, that would be a nice little bonus for me today. Okay, so what is the opposite of 8? And how can we illustrate this on a number line? So what number is 8 units to the right of 0? Right now we're all on page 16 in our module. Page 16. What number is 8 units to the right of 0? Positive 8. So we needed that direction, left and right, like we talked about when we went over the homework. Okay, so what is the opposite of 8? Negative 8. So let's locate the opposite of negative 8. So first let's make our number line. So here we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, negative 7, negative 8. So we started with 8 because we said 8 units to the right of 0. You labeled your number line? We went 8 units to the right of 0. The opposite was negative 8. Now let's take the opposite of the opposite. What's the opposite of negative 8? Positive 8. So the opposite of the opposite is itself. You get your original number back. Exactly. So whenever you take the opposite of an opposite, you get the original number back. Right now, you're just going to look at the board, you put your pencils down, and let's just talk about it for a minute. When you see that negative symbol, think of it as the word opposite. It means the opposite of a number. So the opposite of 5 is 5. Like you said, think of it as the two negatives canceling each other out. Okay, so we come back with 5. Please don't look at the clock, look at the board. So since the opposite of 5 is negative 5, the opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. So we had 5, negative 5, back to 5 again. So what is the opposite of negative 6? 6. So we wanted the opposite of negative 6. Remember, of means to multiply. Parentheses means to multiply. So think of it when you're saying the word of as parentheses. So what is the opposite of 10? 10. How would you write the opposite of 12? So we have 12. We need the opposite of 12. And then we need the opposite of that, which equals 12. So that negative symbol means opposite. You ready for this one? Hang on tight. What is the opposite of a debit of 12? So what's a debit of 12? How would I write a debit of 12? Negative 12. But then I want the opposite of that. And then I want the opposite of that. And which is what? Exactly, and that equals negative 12. Because that's what I started with, my debit of negative 12. So then I took the opposite, and then the opposite. Let's practice changing those words to symbols using the table on page 16. Now your table on page 16, the first column says player or person. You can just cross that out and then fill in the card column. So 4, 150, negative 6, negative 9. Now I don't want you writing it down while we're talking about it. We'll do the row first and then you can write it down. Because if you're writing, you're not looking and maybe not listening as much. All right. I like to think of the parentheses as a spotlight. Or, you know when you go and you see the gumball machine and they have this really cool toy or sticker or tattoo in the front of the gumball machine? Like, oh, I want that. So you beg and beg and beg your parents for 50 cents and then they finally find 50 cents and they give it to you. And then the little toy comes out and then you're all disappointed because it's not the one that was in the front of the machine. You got the junky one that they hid in the back. You know how it comes in that plastic cup case thing? Think of those parentheses as that plastic cup case thing to protect the original number. So if you think of it as a spotlight or the plastic cup case thingy, that might help here a little bit. Okay? I'm going to use the yellow highlighter as like a spotlight or the cup case thingy. So 4 is my original number. So I want to find the opposite of that. So I'm going to put my parentheses around it. You're looking, you're not writing. And then I want the opposite. So I would write it like that. Does everybody see why it's written like that? So what is the opposite of 4? Negative 4. So let's look at this. This is the opposite of 4. You want to change your words to symbols. Opposite of 4 is negative 4. Now I'm going to put my highlight, my spotlight, or my case around the negative 4 because now that's my answer, right? That's my opposite of 4. That's my new answer. I want the opposite of that. So I'm putting my parentheses around that to keep it as that. And then I want the negative of that. So that's how it would be written. Do you see that? And what is the answer? Positive 4. Right back what we started from. So now you can go ahead and fill in that first line. This is that, right back to the beginning. All right, so 150. 150, we'll use our parentheses to put the case around it. And then we want the opposite of that. So the opposite of 150 is negative 150. So I'll put my little protective casing around my new number. Seriously. So here's our original, our answer. We put the parentheses around it, and then another opposite symbol, and that equals positive 150. The opposite of 150 is 150. Okay, now we're starting with negative 6. So let's put parentheses around the number we're starting with, God bless you, and then put the negative. So what's the opposite of negative 6? That's how I would read this. The opposite of negative 6 is positive 6. So now I put the parentheses and the opposite symbol around 6. And the opposite of 6 is negative 6, which is the number that I started with. So negative 9. So the opposite of negative 9 is positive 9. The opposite of positive 9 is negative 9. Okay? Okay. So just talk yourself through it. When you write the negative sign, say the word opposite. When you write parentheses, say the word up. Maybe that will be helpful. Okay. So let's write the opposite of negative 10 as an equation. So the opposite of negative 10. And then you have to close the parentheses. So the opposite of negative 10. I took each word and put it in parentheses. Or if you want to look at it this way, I'll put it back up in a minute. What do I have? Negative 10. So I'm going to put it in my protective casing. Then it looks for the opposite. So doink, there's the opposite of it. But I'm not done. So I'm going to put it in my protective casing. I have another opposite. So doink, and there you go. So it reads as the opposite of negative 10. Sure. This time I tried color coding it to see if that would help. So the opposite of negative 10. So in general, the opposite of the number is the original number. Okay, good. At this point, let's turn. So your homework is the problem set for lesson 5. The problem set for lesson 5 is your homework. Now let's turn to lesson 6 and start that. Okay, rational numbers on the number line. Now in the green vocabulary package, you can highlight the definition of opposite of an opposite. That's the lesson 5. But we already highlighted the definition of rational numbers. So let's just review. A rational number is a number that can be written as a fraction, as long as the denominator is not 0. So 3 is a rational number because 3 over 1, that's a fraction. 3/4, written as a fraction. So all integers are rational numbers. All whole numbers are rational numbers. So positives, negatives, all are rational numbers. But only some decimals. So if I said 3/4 was a rational number, then I know 0.75 is a rational number. So let's see which decimals are rational. If it terminates, remember terminates means to end, like when you terminate your video game, terminate your session. Hopefully nobody will ever terminate my job. So terminate means to end, like that's when it's used, okay? Or, gentlemen, or it repeats with a pattern. So 1/3 is a rational number because that's 0.3 and it repeats. 0.3333, so we write it with bar notation. So these are more rational numbers. So what would be an irrational number? Now think of what the word irrational means. Last night, my 6th grade daughter accused me of being irrational. I walked into her room. She didn't put her laundry away. She didn't make her bed yesterday morning. She didn't straighten her room. She had nail polish all over her dresser. She's not supposed to have food in her room. There were food wrappers in her room. There was a sippy cup in her room that was there for like 2 days. So I walked in her room and I just started, what are you doing? I said, yeah, I told you to clean that up and you want to go away this weekend and you're going to pack and you want to do that. And I just lost it. And I just started going on and on and on and on and on, yelling at my daughter. And then my son made the mistake of walking by. Oh, no. Oh, well, like you got this for tomorrow. I didn't think he's studying chemistry at all. I guess Spanish. My husband knew enough to hide and stay away. Otherwise, I would have kept going on and on and on and on too. So my daughter said I was being a little irrational because I was going on and on and on and on yelling at her. Meanwhile, she just cleaned her room. It would have happened anyway, so it's really not my fault. It's her fault. But anyway, so what do you think an irrational number is? If a rational number terminates and ends, and I was being irrational by going on and 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 on, what do you think an irrational number is? Does anybody happen to know one? Like a decimal that doesn't end? Oh my God. Like what? Yes? 0.333333. No, but that terminates, that repeats with a pattern. Yeah. So it's rational. If it repeats with a pattern. So when I say on and on and on and on, I mean it doesn't develop into a pattern. Hi, no, I just had some oatmeal, and Mrs. Pinto bought me a really delicious chocolate muffin. I'm going to eat next period, so no thanks. I'm good. I don't want any pie right now. Say what? 3.14. 3.14. That actually is. So, pi, what he's referring to is, we think of pi, the irrational number pi, as 3.14. But if we took 22 over 7 and did the division, we could add as many annex zeros as we want, and that would never end. The long division would go on forever. It would not terminate. It would never repeat. It would never develop a pattern. So because that goes on and on, it's called an irrational number. And all irrational symbols, all irrational numbers are written with a symbol. So that's why we use that symbol for pi. Okay, so look, Mr. and Mrs. Pi are in therapy. They're in counseling because Mrs. Pi is 4 and she's a rational number. She's calm and rational, and she's complaining because her husband Pi goes on and on and on. He's irrational.
I like Pi.
And nobody wants to hang out with Pi because he'll talk on and on and on forever. You'll run out of your Ruby. Okay, so now our goal for today is to just practice graphing some more rational numbers on a number line. And this will look very familiar because we did this when we were making number lines for dividing fractions. When we were dividing fractions, we put them on number lines to make our groups, remember? So let's take a look at example 1, which is on page 19 in your packet. So first of all, is 3/10 a rational number? Yes, because as a decimal, it's 0.3. It terminates, it ends, so 3/10. So if I wanted to locate and graph 3/10 and its opposite on the number line, 3/10 is between what whole numbers? 3/10 falls between what whole numbers?
0 and 1.
So what's the opposite of 3/10? Negative 3/10. So negative 3/10 would fall between what two whole numbers? So if 3/10 is between 0 and 1 whole, negative 3/10 would be between 0 and negative 1. So you're going to draw your number line from negative 1, 0, 1, and we'll use intervals of 1/10, and then we could plot 3/10 and negative 3/10. Let's see if we can get one more done. So what do we know about negative 7/4? Negative 7/4 is what? Improper fraction. So if we wanted to plot negative 7/4 and its opposite, 7/4, we would have to go to what whole number?
1 3/4.
Well, 7/4 equals 1 3/4. So what whole number would I have to go to? 1 wouldn't be big enough. I'd have to go to 2 and negative 2. But if I wanted to, like we did when we were dividing fractions, you could just leave them as improper fractions. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, which is 1 whole. 5/4, 6/4, 7/4, and 8/4, which is 2 wholes. That might be easier, or if you just wanted to rewrite it as 1 1/4, 1 2/4, 1 3/4, that's up to you. But you're labeling this now in your notes, gentlemen. So by using equal lengths of 1/4, the numerator is negative 7 and the denominator is 4. So the original fraction of negative 7/4 is located between negative 2 and negative 1. For homework tonight, I do not want you doing the problem set for lesson 6 because it has you pick in your own numbers and then we can't check it. So for lesson 6, do the exit ticket. You should have already fixed that in your agenda, that it's exit tickets